Welcome to the COVID-19 conversations. These conversations are brought to you every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. by the Vaccine Advocacy Resource Group, which is 100% funded by activists. It's also brought to you by the African Alliance with support from the SAMRC and the DSI. It's brought to you in partnership with the Community Constituency COVID-19 Front, the Treatment Action Campaign, and APHA. Colleagues, as you know, the format of these calls are that during the first half hour of the call, we will get an overview from our guest. That will be followed by the second half hour where we will have Q&A and discussions. So we encourage you all to put in your questions, your comments, your thoughts into the chat box and engage, which is really the spirit of the COVID-19 conversations, to break those barriers between research, science, innovation, and civil society, and make sure that we all contribute to learning, sharing, and knowledge generation. Colleagues, Glaudina Loots is the Director for Health Innovation at the Department of Science and Technology and responsible for implementing the health components of the bioeconomy strategy for South Africa. She concentrates on enabling research and innovation that leads to the discovery and evaluation of new drug and treatment regimes, the development of new vaccines, and new robust diagnostics for the identified diseases or conditions, and the development of medical devices. The range of research activities that Loots encourages as part of her portfolio includes the interrogation of indigenous knowledge, basic molecular science and genetics, chemistry and biochemistry, biotechnology, nanotechnology, nuclear physics, and information communication technology, manufacturing processes, and engineering. Amongst others, Loots serves on the South African National Health Research Committee, the South African National AIDS Council, and is a member of the Ministerial Committee on Antimicrobial Resistance. Loots is also a board member of the BioVac Institute, a public-private partnership aimed at the local manufacturing of vaccines and biologics. I'm sure you'll agree with me, vaccines is certainly very much on everyone's agenda. So without further ado, welcome again all colleagues. Thank you, Glaudina Loots, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us this morning. And I will hand over to you for the next 20 to 30 minutes to give us an overview of your work and the work of the department. So welcome and thank you again.
Thank you, Tian. It is a privilege to actually talk to your people. It's to me very, very important. I started off my life as a family planning liaison officer. So the interaction with the community has always been very important for me. Yes, the Department of Science and Innovation used to, 2 years ago, it was still Science and Technology. We are basically overarching department. We do not have a line function. Our function is to see how can we enable research, or how can we make sure the research that's done and funded in South Africa is actually for the public benefit. And as such, the moment when we picked up there are problems and that COVID is going to be a reality in South Africa, we immediately looked at what we can do in order to provide the necessary funding for that. In 2012, we created an entity at the South African Medical Research Council called the Strategic Health Innovation Partnerships. And that was to build research networks for HIV, TB, malaria, and later on maternal and child health, and also your non-communicable diseases. So the networks were already in place. Some funding was already in place. And then we start looking at what are the immediate questions that needs to be answered and what do we need to do. So with Professor Glenda Gray, the CEO of the Medical Research Council, plus a group of eminent scientists, we actually then looked at a wish list of research that needs to be conducted. So the first questions were around what do we know and what do we need to know. So there's a lot of surveillance still being funded. So we get reports on a regular basis to understand what is actually happening. But based on that, we also do have then the samples that we can understand what is the host genetic factors. We're using that kind of information now to start looking at why is the epidemic looking like it's doing in South Africa, and what are actually the triggering factors that is making the situation we're different from the rest of Africa, but we're also different from America and the UK. So what is actually happening in South Africa to start on answering those questions? We immediately started to look at where will the pain points be, and diagnostics was one of them. So we then had a research call for the local manufacturing of diagnostics. As a result of the fact that there was international shortage of diagnostic reagents, and as such, the Department of Health and the National Health Laboratory Service had to change from a broad testing to a very narrow testing of using the PCR abilities as such. So we had to see what else can we do in order to that. So there's still a number of projects that is ongoing, where we also start looking at your point of care and to what extent can we have a strip test for COVID that is not necessary to go through the whole fairly uncomfortable process, and to see to what extent we can assist with providing your frontline healthcare workers with immediate answers as such. So those projects are still ongoing. Some of them are almost ready to be submitted to the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority for approval, and then we can start rolling that out as such, and provided a wider range of tests that are available as such. We also immediately started to look at there was this whole hoo-ha in America about hydroxychloroquine. We then looked at what can we do, how can we design trials that we can test what drugs regimes can provide some protection for your healthcare workers. We concentrated mostly on the healthcare workers because they are for the drug test, because they are the ones who's really exposed as such. But the way we get the researchers then to design the trials was actually that we can stick in different drugs. And so when the whole thing with hydroxychloroquine sort of blew up, we actually had a number of other drugs that we're in the process of testing to see to what extent they can help. And we also changed it from prevention to prevention and treatment. So there's different components of that, and it is that we are then working with. We are working with international groups such as the Solidarity trials and so on, that was now suspended as well. But we are very much working with our own international partners that we've got, and looking at not being part of just the mainstream, but to actually use our own expertise and insights into what is happening in South Africa, and then to take it from there and see what is applicable to South Africa, what will actually fit the South African profile. Then we started to look, and all along, this is now on the biomedical side, but all along then, the department as such has also been very much involved with the whole ventilator project, where we then looked at to what extent can we use the technology stations, the infrastructure that we've put in place in the past to actually start manufacturing, and to the design process and the manufacturing process for the ventilators as such. And right from the beginning, they decided on the CPAP ventilator. That's a non-invasive ventilator, and that is the one that's being used now, and it's being manufactured, and we showed that we can actually do that. And the amazing thing is how the scientists, the industry, the finance people, Business for South Africa, all just started to pull together and say, okay, fine, we've got a problem. We need to do something about it. And that is the sort of momentum I hope we can retain. That once COVID is over, it's not going to be, okay, fine, thanks, it was a good exercise, let's move on. But to what extent we can keep those engagements, those discussions going forward as such. So then also we had we are funding, there's 2 of the vaccine trials on the moment. The one is the AstraZeneca Oxford one, with Shabir Mari, that we actually funding the HIV component of that, because one, it's very essential that with the high burden of HIV positive people in South Africa, we have to make sure that we do not cause harm and that the vaccines are actually applicable and appropriate for South Africa. So that is why we are specifically looking at that. So any vaccine manufacturer or developer, one of the things we said, yes, we will assist you, or we might even make some funding available, but that is specifically because we have to make sure your vaccine is actually fit for purpose for South Africa as such. With regard to when the outbreak in St. Augustine Hospital in KwaZulu-Natal happened, we were actually funding the understanding genetics, and there's a lot of, in this science media, there's a lot around the where did the infections came from South Africa. So that is an ongoing project. We're also then ongoing monitoring. Is the virus changing? Is it still stable? Do we need to be aware of any mutations that might be becoming more dangerous and stuff, things like that? So we're providing ongoing funding for that to understand what is going on, and you're looking at what is happening in the Western Cape. That was a different introduction of the virus than what happened in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, and then to keep track of what's happening, to what extent they now with the open provinces, to what extent it starts mingling and we get a new variation on the theme. So we're constantly providing the funding for that as well. And now the latest thing is where we start looking at maternal and what happened to mothers who contracted COVID, pregnant mothers who contracted COVID. What are actually the long-term effects of that on the mother and as well as the baby? So those are kind of the things that we are looking into now. And then we are also then looking at what we call the host genetics component to understand within the South African genetic diversity, what is COVID? Why do some people get it, but they are basically asymptomatic, and some become very sick? And to understand if there's a genetic connection within that, and to then be able to sort of predict who will be more susceptible to the disease as such. And then the latest study that we are now looking at is the ongoing surveillance and understanding what is the disease doing to people, to sort of for the next year or so to start looking at what will happen, what happened to people who were severely ill, what are the side effects that is permanent, to what extent, when does those side effects, do they get corrected, or is it something that's permanent, and to what extent we then need to adapt the treatment of those kind of people. So it's looking forward now on how do we manage the post-acute phase into the long-term as such. So this is just sort of a short overview of what we are doing. We're also involved with the Human Sciences Research Council that is busy with the seroprevalence study at the moment, that we can actually determine what portion of South Africans actually had COVID. We don't know. There are studies in the Western Cape that say up to 46%. I've seen in some places they're up to say 60%, but that's all to a large extent guesstimates, and we actually now they are busy rolling out the study to understand what is happening with regard to COVID, who had it, because those kind of questions are essential when you start looking at. You need to see the immunity that built up. How long will that immunity last? And will COVID become something like flu, or is it a once-off? And those are the kinds of things that we need to start investigating, so that it has the effect also on the vaccine. Which groups do we need to look into for a vaccine? Is going to become an annual basis that we need to, like the flu vaccine, have a COVID vaccine with the flu vaccine that we need to make available. So it's all those kind of things that we're now starting to look into on understanding what is going on. So that's just for, I know it's less than less than 20 minutes, but yes, that is it. I think let's rather look at the questions and be more specific.
No, absolutely, it's perfectly great. I mean, I think that's a really interesting insight, and I think innovation has been very much on, at the forefront of people's minds. So I'll get straight into it. So, Glaudina, at a conference in July, the Trade and Industry Minister was speaking about the general landscape, and specifically, he said that the shortage of test kits, ventilators, and medical grade masks had underlined the importance of Africa developing a strong innovation and manufacturing capability and building more resilient economies. We know when the virus first came to our shores, we had no local manufacturing capacity for ventilators, and yet the healthcare demand for ventilators surged. But today, as we speak, South African designed and manufactured ventilators are rolling off the production line. We know that since that conference, thousands of non-invasive ventilators, the CPAP ones that you spoke about, are being delivered to hospitals and medical facilities across the country. And this is all made possible by South African ingenuity and made by South African hands. So what would you say, we've gone from this no capacity to produce these CPAP ventilators to now having them coming off the production line. What would you say is the next innovation, the next big thing that is coming in the foreseeable future, in the next few months, as a result of this ingenuity and innovation space? What can we look forward to? What can we anticipate? What can we begin to engage communities to start thinking about in the context of innovation and COVID?
So one thing that COVID has taught us very heavily is we let slip our manufacturing abilities because it was cheaper to import from India and China. And when there was the scare that we didn't even have enough paracetamol because India closed its borders, I think it sort of came as a shock to a number of people when things like Panado, you're not going to have sufficient Panado, and people start then thinking on, we actually do have the abilities in South Africa. So why do we not bring it together? And this is why we did the ventilators, was sort of, we've got a very strong engineering group within the medical device sector, but also within the CSIR and at universities. And then that is what we brought in that together. Now, the thing is, what do we do post-COVID? How do we keep that momentum going and not just drop it off and go back to our dependency environment? But at the same time, we also then started to look at, as I said, the diagnostics and to what extent we can start manufacturing diagnostic kits in South Africa, and to not be dependent on imports, whether it's from the US or anywhere else. So we're looking at the sort of medical device component, we're looking at the diagnostic component, how to retain the momentum and the funding we've put in now. We also are at the same time, as a different part of going forward, looking at the manufacturing of the active pharmaceutical ingredients of a number of essential drugs, so that we build that capacity. We've lost that capacity and we actually really need to start from scratch. So we are actually got a different plan that we building on the expertise sitting at university and at some industry on actually then start manufacturing some of the essential drugs, and so that we will not be caught short. Okay. We've got a lot of capacity in South Africa to do the formulation of drugs, but not the actual to manufacture the actives. And the actives takes up to 70% of the cost of any drugs. And so there is a business case for that. But we're not only doing it on our own, we're actually doing it within the SADC region, but also in discussion with the African Union to see to what extent we collectively across Africa then can start building this ability to do that. South Africa is the furthest down the line with regard to the manufacturing of the active pharmaceuticals. A number of other African countries is looking at the secondary formulation and to at least strengthen that component as such. And then lastly, we're looking at the local manufacturing of vaccines. So with BioVac, BioVac is partly owned by government and then a private consortium. Um, they actually are manufacturing one of the main childhood vaccines, Exacxum, um, that they've gone through the tech transfer process and to start manufacturing, but it's only the full finishing, the formulation, full and finishing of that. So we also then realized, but we need to start looking, how do you do the actives that is needed for different vaccines? But this is pure that you need to look at the economics as well. To what extent does it make financial sense, and how can we roll out and make that capacity available uh, across Africa as such? One of the main problems within vaccines is actually around they can manufacture the vaccine APIs, but the full finishing is one of the major bottlenecks. So BioVac as such is busy gearing up to actually take bigger vials than the normal ones that they use, so that we can actually manufacture up to 50 million doses of COVAX vaccine within a year, if it is needed. So those things are all happening in the background to build that capacity in South Africa to be more self-reliant on what we are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. It preempted the next question, which that we've seen news reports about BioVac ramping up its capability, but the reports until now, so thank you for that, weren't clear on whether this would include the capability to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines. And then, because of course the main item of interest here, or the angle, is that increased manufacturing capability, at least certainly in some areas of civil society, it translates into easier access and perhaps more equitable access, especially, it just increases the likelihood that South Africans would have access. So thank you for that, that clarity. Glaudina, could you speak to us about, you've touched on the AU and some of your partners, could you speak to us a bit more about what your regional work and partnerships look like? How are we as leaders, as one of the only countries in Africa who are leading this work, how are we bringing the rest of the continent along with us with this innovation and increased capacity and identifying opportunities to think out of the box to get us answers to COVID?
So we work very closely with the African CDC that's based in Kenya, especially around the vaccine, and to see to what extent, based on our experience that we have, can build the clinical trial abilities of our fellow African countries. And I'm part of the sort of CDC Africa Union COVAX clinical trial steering committee to see how we can make sure that it's the whole clinical trial is not dominated by one or two countries, but it is actually sort of more equally spread across Africa, and at the same time build that capacity so that our fellow African countries can also start doing that thing. So let's go down to what equipment is needed in research facilities, what community engagement, because with regard to community engagement on vaccines, South Africa is the leader. It's been acknowledged that we are actually the leaders on that, and how now to impart that, how to do it, how to do that community engagement. We were actually requested by CEPI to assist them in sort of taking the modules that was developed as part of the HIV component and then do the training then of how to do that in community engagement, how to bring your community boards and that into your clinical trials. So it's very much we're looking at, on the moment, on the vaccines, how we can assist with building the capacity. With regard to the manufacturing, BioVac, on the vaccine side, BioVac is basically to a large extent leading the whole process on that, combined with Senegal and Egypt. So we were looking at what can be done in a short time, and then as part of the drug manufacturing component, we also have a number of discussions and at AU level on to see which country can do what with regard and how can we learn from one another with regard to how to start scaling up and what is needed and what is not needed, What kind of negotiations do you need to enter into? We've explored things around pool procurement and to what extent it makes sense. And then it goes back to having your collective voice around the vaccine, no, not the prices of access to your drugs and vaccines, and to start having those discussions about what is needed, what is fair, and how do we then take those discussions further. It's a very delicate situation sometimes when you have to sort of go to your originators and then to start discussing with them, okay, fine, what can be done and what cannot be done. So it's very much within South Africa, important, yes, but within an African context that we are doing those discussions as such. So we work very closely with the African Union here. It's also because President Ramaphosa is in the moment the chair, it made it so much easier then to actually start engaging in those discussions.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think certainly I am excited now knowing around your work within CEPI and COVAX, because as civil society, we've certainly had a struggle trying to get a seat at that table. And it's always refreshing to know we have a comrade on the inside who could perhaps continue that discussion with us as to how we can indeed get that seat at the table. It's been a very closed.
So on that thing, one of the worrying things is when you start looking at COVAX, there are 8 African countries that do not qualify to become part of the advanced manufacturing commitment, where those 8 countries need to find the money themselves. And it's not only, there's a number of countries in South America as well that's basically excluded from the benefits of it, and you have to buy your space into the COVAX facility, the same as what the UK or Germany or what will buy this space in. So you don't have the money, but you have to compete at that level, and it's becoming quite a problem for a number of countries as such. And how do you take this further?
Yeah, and I think it just constantly highlights the issue of equity, of equitable access, about how we understand specifically countries in the global south and their colonial history, in terms of how do we, exactly what you're saying, how do we expect Togo or Ghana or Senegal or Zimbabwe to come to the table as equals to the UK or any other country in the EU. So thank you for that. Glaudina, could we now move to, so a question here is that the Department of Science and Innovation has redirected some research funds to COVID-19 related proposed interventions. Could you speak to what perhaps could be regarded as detrimental effects to the research where that funding came from? So you've moved funding, who has lost out because of this shift of COVID?
We were very careful. We actually looked at all the projects, and as a result of the lockdown, which ones we have to put a hold on for a period or postpone. And so none of the projects are actually, some of them are postponed, and some of it went slower with some of them. So that excess money that was not immediately used, we then pulled that into make that available for COVID. So we were very careful not to adversely affect any projects as such that is being funded. We also made an additional funding available for that was a large project that it's still in the design phase, and because of COVID, that would not have happened this year. So we took that money, and it's a fairly substantial amount of money. We then redirected that to COVID. So there's nothing that's really being negatively affected because COVID just shifted the timelines on anyway. So we were very, very careful with that as such. We made sure that people do not lose their jobs. We actually had sort of checked on that there's sufficient funds available still to ensure that people can carry on with their jobs. They might not be able to go and conduct the research or go into the laboratories for a period, but just to make sure that the we don't lose the expertise as such.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Glaudina, the next question is, could you unpack for us some of the indigenous knowledge systems work that the department is currently undertaking? And I guess here it will be a two-part answer, one generally and then specifically to COVID.
We actually got a separate unit. It's one of my colleagues where Dr. Ank Shabalala, where he's specifically looking at indigenous knowledge innovation and start looking at what medicinal plants based on previous use and of the knowledge from the traditional healers can be then repurposed for certain things. So they've got a number of plant-based remedies that they are now putting through the process of actually doing clinical trials to actually show that it does have an effect on COVID as such. So they also have a number of projects looking at diabetes, looking at TB treatment based on your traditional remedies that has been around for quite a long time. But this is now to actually scientifically then validate, and so that people can make a claim that yes, Sutherlandia or Buchu or whatever, honeybush, but these things actually do have a medicinal effect and it will not cause harm. So then that is what they are concentrating on. Dr. Shabalala is also, and some of his contacts are very closely in collaborating with the World Health Organization, and one of his colleagues, Dr. Matsadiso from Free State University, is actually on the specific WHO Traditional Medicine Committee. So they are very much involved in also internationally ensuring that people do listen to traditional remedies, to traditional people's knowledge, and to look from that. For example, the whole issue around the claims that were made with artemisinin, and they are looking at, yes, does it actually have an effect, yes or no? Because we also have to for example, on the artemisinin, one of the major things, it is still the main component for the malaria treatment in Africa. And if you suddenly start using it for something else, but you're not sure if it's going to use for that something else, you might actually create resistance. And then that treatment for malaria, a known treatment for malaria, will then become obsolete and you need to find something else then to use for that. So you have to sort of make sure that your treatment does actually address that specific disease, and before you can start making those claims. So he's very much involved with that component as well, to harness the knowledge, to ensure that there's also the benefit sharing. Then should one of these things go further, that the benefits actually go back to the community or to the traditional healer or that. So that is the whole role that he is playing as such. I assist from the side where I then look more at the sort of scientific component, and where there is not necessarily traditional knowledge involved, but we still do the sort of looking at specific plants for users, but we work very closely together on how you can do these things.
Yeah, great, thanks for that. So Glaudina, COVID has come, our world has changed, we've got this tsunami of research, we've got vaccine candidates on the go, we've got people looking at treatments, we've got movements looking at PPE and access and equity and all of these things. So within this entire landscape, and perhaps honing into vaccines, what gives you, Glaudina Loots, the most hope? What excites you? What trial, what innovation, what intervention has stopped you in your tracks and you thought, something here? In all of the noise, what stands out to you?
There isn't one. No, there's not. I'm more from a skeptical perspective, where I say, give me the proof that it's working. And to actually wade through all the hype. to me, that's important, not to clutch onto something and start running with it. From experience, I've been down it so many times that you think something will work, and then it stops. The moment when it gets into phase 2 clinical trials, it actually doesn't work. To me, the interesting fact is the fact that we are starting to look closer at the genetic diversity in Africa and how it actually, we cannot just copy from America or from Europe. We actually have to make sure those things are applicable. There's so many of these drugs that in an African genetic they do not, we either have receptors that the disease does not totally attach to it. And this is what we need to understand. What makes us unique? And why can't we just sort of apply a specific drug and expect the same outcomes? We actually need to make sure those things are applicable, are really compatible with our own genetic setup before we actually start subscribing it. So the knowledge that we've started to create for other drugs, we're now applying to COVID to understand what genetic setup of different populations. And you can't just say there's one African genome. You need to start looking at what is this pill definitely good for us? Will it not cause harm in other aspects? Or will it have any effect? So there's a number of pills that we know that you might as well give people Smarties, will have a better effect. But the doctors prescribe it. So to me, is this COVID has sort of fast-tracked that component. We start to look at the genetic setup and acknowledging that Africans are unique. Do not just say it works in the West, therefore it will work in Africa. No.
Absolutely.
We are unique, and we need to acknowledge that.
So thanks for that, Glaudina. So Ntando is asking a question in the chat. Where would you place our performance as a country with regards to how much we contribute to health R&D? Which global and regional declarations or targets are we meeting?
I don't think there's such targets. Based on our experience in the past, we are very much being acknowledged as leaders in HIV research. And based on that, we are now involved within the COVID component as such. But we constantly are what they call punching above our weight on the science contribution South Africans are making. But it is essential that we keep that momentum and not let that slip, and to make sure that we teach the youngsters then to be of the same scientific quality going forward. When you start looking at the sort of publications and things like that, it is if you compare it with the fellow lower middle income countries, then South Africa is definitely off the top. Our universities are of a higher standard than a number of our neighbors and so on. It's an acknowledged fact. But how do we retain that and not let that slip? That is one of the major things as such.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I think one of the things is South Africans are not scared to ask questions.
That's true.
We don't mind being controversial. We actually, I think, sometimes prefer to be controversial.
Yeah.
We don't accept just what somebody else is saying to us. And I think that is actually a very good contribution factor to the way that we approach things. Even in the communities, they don't just accept you because you say, because I say so, you're going to do it. No, give me the reason why. And I think that inquiring mind is we need to keep on cultivating that.
Absolutely. Glaudina, so in terms of the department, question in the chat box, what are some of the standards used for community engagement by the department, and where can we find examples of these? Where have you seen examples of community engagement that have particularly excited you in terms of your work?
You see, because we are not a line department. As I said, we do not provide services. Our community engagement is through our researchers. It is through the work that the researchers are doing, what the Medical Research Council and the Human Sciences Research Council and so is, who are doing that. The only guidelines that we have is around the indigenous knowledge component on how to engage, how to make sure that people are treated fairly, and that is the one area where the department is taking the lead on that. The rest is through looking at what is best practice with regard to research, and make sure that that is actually the ethics component is rolled out as such. I'm also a member of the National Bioethics Council, and we had not too long ago a whole discussion around the corruption and how it actually affects the healthcare workers and the communities. And so we have those discussions and be open about it. And because we sort of look at a more broader perspective and not bogged down by the day-to-day service delivery, we can have a sort of more look into how do we engage in those discussions and taking it forward.
Mm.
We are planning to have another one specifically around the ethics around access and what's fair.
Yeah. I think that's a huge question globally, regionally. It's just increasingly becoming about access. Glaudina, could you speak a bit to, and I guess this ties into another question in the chat from Human Hatters. Could you speak to some of the department's work around gender and racial transformation within the department and what your views are in terms of leading that road to a place where we see the fabled South African institution that is truly transformative?
Yeah, so when I actually started at the department, I was part of the Women in Science group. It was actually a part of the sort of putting together. So at that stage, we started then just acknowledging the role that women are playing within the science environment and the engineering environment, and start to make people aware that when you design research projects, you have to include the voice of women into those research questions. That to extent is become standard now as part of the research projects that we are funding. You need to say how you address issues around gender. How do you address issues around transformation? So when we fund research projects, we also say that if it is an established researcher, to what extent does that research project actually include young Black researchers in the process of enabling them then to be able to build those same capacities and to learn. And so we've got a very specific, we do not have a policy as such, but we've got a very specific instruction to make sure that we build the capacities across the board. If you start looking at how the transformation within the CSIR is happening, you will start seeing it coming through. You also start seeing it at some of the other research councils that we are responsible for, to see to what extent we are acknowledging that the expertise is not sitting in one group. It is actually, there's a lot of very fantastic people that we need to acknowledge and make sure that they go forward. So it is very much built into we have to report on it on a quarterly basis on what are we doing to transform the sciences, and to not only transform to the number of X amount of Black scientists, but the science questions should be relevant to the society in South Africa? And what are those questions? Are they applicable to, will it benefit the society in South Africa? So it's the whole being sensitive to where we are and have those discussions here.
Thanks for that. Glaudina, okay, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap. What has been the role of the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, if you can speak to this at all, in approving the import of the investigational vaccine for trials as seen in Oxfam COVID-19? Could you speak a bit more to how that came about? So we saw the public announcements.
When, $1 million question, that one. When a company wants to bring a vaccine into South Africa, they need, for clinical trials, they actually need to have two permissions. The one is from the South African Health Product Regulatory Authority, SAHPRA, for the clinical trial to actually happen in South Africa. And the second one is then actually to get a GMO certificate that the vaccine is safe and that they feel it will not cause harm from a genetically modified component as such. So in order for any vaccine trial to happen, they need to have both certificates. So it's from a safety for human health, but also from the genetic modification. It will not cause harm to nature, or that it is not something that can spread beyond what is the intended purposes as such. So Department of Agriculture is then specifically looking at the GMO component of that. Department of Science and Innovation is actually the co-chair of that specific committee, where we make sure that these issues are being addressed as such. So I don't know which component you want. So yeah, if anybody tries to do a vaccine and you do not go through both processes, you will not be allowed to do any vaccine trials as such.
Great, thank you for that. Glaudina, I'll now like to hand over to you. Do you have any specific calls for the participants
I think
on the webinar?
I think I would, if it's possible, I would appreciate if people can drop on social media or your system that you've got into place. Tell us what are the burning questions on the research side, what they think that we should look into to see if we can find answers for that. What are the things that we need to really start answering? And I would appreciate if we can have those burning issues. Actually, if you can assist me in getting those burning issues together, that we can start looking at it and to see to what extent we are doing some of it, and then we need to be more open about it, or it's questions that we haven't even thought it. So it is on your biomedical components, but it's also on your community components, and what are the issues that they feel that we're not attending to, and that actually could cause harm if we don't do it. I'd appreciate if that can be sent through.
No, absolutely. What we'll do is during the course of this week, we'll liaise with you a bit more and we'll send out an announcement on our networks and certainly facilitate that process. I think civil society is always open and excited at opportunities to engage and, recognize.
It is something beyond COVID. I think that I will speak to the Medical Research Council to see to what extent we can actually have this a set system that we've constantly got those kind of questions that people can provide their inputs and such.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that brings us to the end of this conversation. Just to say, we acknowledge your support of our work and also with the MRC making these weekly conversations happen, as well as some of our other work. Colleagues, Glaudina Loots is the Director for Health Innovation at the Department of Science and Technology and responsible for implementing the health components of the bioeconomy strategy for South Africa. Glaudina, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to chat with us today. We will be in touch to take some of those key issues forward. Have a great Thursday, and thank you to everyone who has taken the time to join us. Next week, on our COVID-19 conversations, you will recall in one of our previous webinars, we hosted one of the world's largest COVID prevention networks CoVPN, they will be coming back with an update on the very specific South African trials that they are starting to work on. In South Africa, following that, we have another partner call with one of our key partners, the Treatment Action Campaign. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. Have a great Thursday, and we look forward to chatting next week. Thanks again, Glaudina.
Thank you.